My guests today are Laura Greene and Angela Ruth, co-founders of Harmony Homeschool Academy, a secular homeschool hybrid solution for middle and high school students in the greater Raleigh-Durham-Cary, North Carolina area. The founders opened with sort of a soft launch of Harmony Homeschool Academy this past January of 2025, hoping or expecting, I suppose, about 5 students. They now have roughly 25 students and are anticipating almost 60 students this fall. So clear demand for this innovative education solution in the Raleigh-Durham-Cary area. Laura is a licensed psychologist with a background in school psychology. She is also a homeschool parent. And Angela spent her early career working in the US government and transitioned to teaching about 10 years ago. In addition to teaching social studies and Spanish, she has been homeschooling her children for the past 5 years. Laura and Angela, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Thanks
so
for
much.
having
Thanks for
us.
having us.
I'm so glad to have you here. I am really excited to hear about the launch of Harmony Homeschool Academy. Much more demand than you anticipated, which is a great thing to see. And again, must be so validating for the work that you're doing. But let's start a little bit back to your experiences, both of you, in education prior to kind of homeschooling and now launching Harmony. What brought you into education to begin with? Laura,
Sure.
should we start with
Oh,
you?
sure. Sure.
Yeah.
So my background is actually school psychology. So I
Yeah.
earned my doctorate in school psychology at Rutgers about almost 20 years ago. Yeah, about 20 years ago now. And at that time, I did work in schools, and I had a really unique position in that not most school psychologists are doing all of the testing and case management. I was doing more of social emotional counseling at a middle school. And so I was there for a few years and just loved it, loved being in the school environment and doing a lot within there. Then I relocated with my family and I moved into private practice where I was doing mostly educational evaluations and
Mm.
testing for students with disabilities, and then consulting on sort of treatments and ways to manage that. So that was my professional background. In terms of personally with homeschooling. About 5 years ago, I have 3 sons, one of whom I homeschool. And about 5 years ago, he had been in some public schools, a charter school, and we just didn't see the right fit. He was going into fifth grade. We said, let's not move schools again. Let's try a year at home. And we just fell in love with it. So he will be starting ninth grade next year. And we've had a
Wow.
really great experience.
That's great. And then are you still also running a school psychologist
So I've
organization?
transitioned more. I'm a licensed psychologist now in Raleigh, so I do have a practice and I do mostly therapy now around anxiety, depression,
Mm.
and work some with adolescents, but mostly with adults at this point.
Okay, great. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But Angela, I'd love to get your story too, because you made the leap from government work to education, where you spent about a decade. Would love to hear what drew you to education.
Sure. Yeah. So I started out pretty early, right after undergraduate school, working for the government. I ended up in Iraq for a year. It was a completely different experience than what I'm experiencing now. And then, honestly, it was probably when my youngest daughter, I have 3 children, was about 11 weeks old. I actually lost my husband. And
Oh,
so I was widowed very unexpectedly and decided as a result of that, to make some life changes where I would be with my kids more. And of course, my kids have been through a lot too. So my kids, initially started out in first Montessori and then in the public school system, but it just unfortunately was a very difficult environment for them to be in. All three of them are, high functioning neurodivergent. But socially, emotionally, they unfortunately didn't have Laura. And so we didn't have that support system in place. Um, so I actually pulled my middle son out from school around second grade and started homeschooling. And then when COVID hit, I decided to start homeschooling all three of my kids
mm.
and immediately ingratiated myself in the homeschooling community, running co-ops, teaching, that kind of thing, and have loved it and won't look back.
Amazing. Wow, I'm
Yeah.
so sorry to hear about your husband's passing, and the sort of life shift that that
Yep.
created. But also glad that you found success in homeschooling and lots of rewards there for
Yeah.
your family. So when did this idea of creating Harmony Homeschool Academy or some kind of innovative education space begin to percolate for both of you? And I guess sort of related to that, how did you team up to start brainstorming what would become this program?
So, in the Raleigh area, there are a significant number of homeschoolers. It's really a unique area for homeschooling. It's unclear exactly how many homeschoolers there are, but I've heard that in this kind of triangle area, there's around maybe 30,000 students that are homeschooling, which is substantial.
Yeah.
So, there are a lot of homeschooling options for students, but most of them are at the elementary level. And Laura and I both have high school and middle school students, and they are at the point where they want to be out of the home a little bit more. None of them want to go back to public school. And so we started talking about, hey, there's this gap for these older kids. We're also very beneficial in that both of our sons are kind of best friends. And so that's what brought us together. And then we just started kind of casually talking about it. And Laura turned it very serious. She said, hey, if you're into this, I'm into it. And I said, yeah, let's go. So that's
Wow. And so, Laura, when was that? When were you kind of getting serious about it? What was our timeline here?
That was last May or June. We were just talking and a couple of Starbucks meetings and and a lot of work later, and here we are. But yeah, we just kind of ran with it as soon as we got going. We got very excited about it. And the feedback, initial feedback very early on was, yes, we're looking for something like that from other families and in the community. We are also secular, and many of the programs around here are religious. So that was something that we just found, kind of this gap where parents were going, I have students in middle school. I'm looking for something secular. This is perfect. And it really kind of energized us and kept us moving.
So take us through a little bit of the sort of pre-launch steps. You said that this idea became, serious last spring or right around this time. And what did you do kind of during summer and fall to get ready for your soft opening in January of 2025?
So I'd like Laura to chime in too, but we pretty early on decided how we were going to manage this separately and together. And that was
Mm,
pretty critical. So Laura kind of said, hey, look, I love taking on the operational tasks associated with the business.
mm,
Uh, and has been very good at it for us. Whereas for me, I'm a little bit more academic in nature. I love the teaching. I love the
mm.
reading. I love designing curriculum. So from there, it made it much easier and much clearer for us to figure out how we would go forward with this. Laura, do you want to chime in on some of the operational stuff?
Sure, absolutely. So as we were talking, and we had visions, and we just kind of brainstormed different things of what we were looking through for, and what was important. I mean, a lot of this came from our own personal needs with our children. Of, hey, what are we looking for? Where do we feel the gaps? What would they benefit from? And as we were talking about getting started, that last fall was a little too soon with everything we had to do. But we said, hey, a lot of homeschoolers already have their plans in place for the year, but let's just do a soft launch. Let's see what we get. It's going to be a great learning opportunity for us. We can get feedback from parents who do participate. Our whole program is 3 days a week, but for our soft launch, we said, let's just do 1 day a week. We looked around for space and ended up finding a great kind of educational building. So it's secular, it's brand new,
Mm.
and we're able to rent and grow within that environment. So we were really excited to get that. And we set up this soft launch for 1 day a week. And we started doing some marketing online. We've hosted a number of open houses, and we invite families in and we present to them. We give a presentation about Harmony and our philosophy, and the schedule, and we take them on a tour of the building. And we started doing that and getting a lot of interest. So we changed a few classes based on parent feedback, got all of our, I's dotted and T's crossed, and got ready from that standpoint to launch this January.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you said that it started as 1 day a week, but now it's at three. Is that
It will
right?
be 3 in the fall.
Three in the fall.
Yes.
Plus,
So
I
the
think you
soft
had
launch has just been the 1 day plus we
got it.
also, do you want to talk about Friday series, Angela?
Yeah, well, we'll get to
Oh,
sort of the
okay.
mechanics in a minute. But yeah, so I know the plan is 3 days a week plus this, right, Fun Friday. So families could opt for 4 days, full days if they wanted to, or kind of pick and choose among different enrollment options depending
Right.
on the classes that interest them. And will you be able to stay in that same location and expand there? Because location's often the biggest hurdle for new founders. So just
That
so
was our
amazing.
biggest hurdle. That was our biggest hurdle was finding
Okay.
place. And it was important for us to us for it to be a nice space where people want to
Hmm.
come, where we want to go, where the
Yeah.
students are going to feel happy to be there. And there's a lot of natural light. It's already equipped as a school. So we have the smart boards and all of that. So we've been very fortunate and we're able to grow, which is great. So we could go from
Wow.
what we needed this spring into what we need for the fall. But yes, that was definitely probably our biggest challenge was finding a space. We had trouble finding places, and then ones we did, we kind of walked out a little defeated, like, oh, when are we going to do this? And when we walked out of this one, we both kind of looked at each other and turned back around and said, okay, we're ready.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry, Angela, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say for us, and I'm sure hopefully we can talk about this more, but for us, it felt as critical to make sure the teachers wanted to come to work and that the teachers were paid fairly, compensated fairly. The average kind of homeschool-ish teacher, the YMCA has a lot of homeschool programs too, is making somewhere between 20 and $30 an hour, which in no way compensates for the amount of work and time and effort put into those classes. So that's where the real estate piece of this is tricky because you really want to be able to also compensate them fairly.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question, which is I imagine it took a little bit of a leap to kind of sign this lease or, negotiate for this space, not knowing exactly how many students you would have enrolled and anticipating only about five to start. Of course, you blew past that enrollment very quickly. Now, you have what, 25.
Yeah.
And again, expecting about 60 this fall. So, but tell us a little bit about that as a founder, as an entrepreneur, kind of jumping in, taking that leap, and just not knowing about the finances and kind of how to pay the bills.
So Laura created really a budget for us very early on. And what we were able to do was really configure how many students do we need to be able to make rent. And
Mm.
so for the classroom that we were renting, it was 5 students. And given that it was mid-year, we kind of looked at some other programs around the area, and that's where we kind of came up with that anticipatory number of 5, which happened to align with the fact that we needed 5.
Mm.
And so that was really our bottom line was we have to be able to make rent. Laura and I are willing to sacrifice teacher payment because it's a new business.
And
But
because your children are there too, so sort of in lieu of you paying
yes,
tuition, you are able to have them participate. Yeah.
exactly. And then we were in the very fortunate position of running, as Laura mentioned, a number of open houses where we've had probably the greatest success.
Mm.
Having people meet us in person, seeing our presentation, being able to really anticipate their questions and answer them thoroughly. And we ended up with about 25, which is just awesome.
Yeah, what's that like for both of you? To now be at 25 and expecting more than doubling by the next fall, or this fall. What is that like for you?
It's really exciting. I mean, it's
Yeah.
so exciting to see it in play every week when we're there. And I think the other thing that's really exciting for me is, and I think this may be true for Angela as well, is that it's families who have such aligned educational values, that are on the same page. So there's just this sense of community within the school, but even with the parents. And we've always said having the teachers, having the parents, and having the students all be happy, feel like they belong is so important. And it has such a nice feel, like it's a place I want to be. The kids are lovely, the families are lovely, and there is this shared idea of what we're doing that is valued by everybody, which just makes it really exciting and fun to go to work.
I think also it's a somewhat unique demographic in that it's middle school and high schoolers.
Mm.
That's a really hard age group in different ways for many different reasons. But all of the families there really are looking for a more wholesome experience. And I say that not necessarily in the way that we define the term wholesome, but they're looking for, yes, a community, but also a socially, emotionally safe location for their child. And I think what a lot of parents have realized is that when their kids are anxious, they're not able to retain what they're learning. And so, what Laura and I have really strived to do is to provide a place where these kids are happy and then are able to feel comfortable enough that those anxiety levels drop so that then we can push those more quality academics their way. And the parents are right on board with that. And so that part of it is just so gratifying, really, really gratifying.
Oh, I love that. Tell us more about these families, the 25 students you have now, the 60 projected. Are these families who have always been homeschooling? Are they new to homeschooling in the sort of recent past or since COVID? Are they coming from conventional schools? Who are they and why are they attracted to your model?
Yeah, so it's the demographic is really interesting. So there are certainly some more traditional homeschoolers who have been homeschooling from the get-go, kind of in a more traditional home-like setting.
Mm.
But what they have expressed is that as their children have gotten older, they are looking to take more classes outside the home.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of that happy balance for them. We have had some people from public school come. And part of it is their dissatisfaction with the public school system, and wanting something that is more homeschool-like, but maybe they don't feel equipped or they're just not ready to take on, full homeschooling in its entirety and looking to outsource, so to speak, some of these classes. And then I would say there are a lot of COVID homeschoolers
Mm.
who really, and I think a lot of us can appreciate this, really learned the value and the importance of having your kids just a little bit longer, having them with you a little bit longer, but also recognizing that a balance is also sometimes pretty critical and essential. So I think that really encapsulates some of them. Oh, I guess I also missed kind of our neurodivergent population.
Mm.
So, there are a number of our families that have students that are neurodivergent, high functioning neurodivergent, and they're looking for that classroom environment that is safe for them. And that is one of the things that we really spend a lot of time focusing on is creating an environment for everyone and having those, listed kids, those that recognize that maybe there is something a little bit different or they learn differently, be able to accept them and create community in all areas. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I want to double click a bit on the anxiety issue that you mentioned earlier, Angela, and how, unless students feel safe and secure and comfortable in their learning environment, it's very difficult to tackle that academic work. And Laura, this is a main part of your practice, it sounds like,
Exactly.
is sort of talking about anxiety and helping individuals and families kind of navigate anxiety issues. I'd love for you, Laura, to talk a little bit about what you're seeing in your practice around anxiety in young people,
Sure.
and then maybe again how Harmony sort of addresses some of these.
Absolutely. I think there's just over the last, probably close to 10 years has been such an influx. Oftentimes I'll have parents come in and say, I tell them it's okay, they can get whatever they want, but my child's so stressed out because they don't have A pluses and they think they're not going to get into good schools. So much of the anxiety seems in a lot of the practice seems to be student driven.
Mm.
Where the students are really the environment they're in, the pressure that they create for themselves around in their peer groups and such really show a high level of anxiety. They are picking up more and more to do. They feel like, let me get that college application to have absolutely every activity, and they're staying up late to study. They're taking multiple AP classes. They're wanting to do the absolute best that they can. And a lot of them are just internalizing this anxiety. And oftentimes they are kids who are holding it together during the day, but really get home and just are exhausted from what they're having to deal with.
And why do you think it's worsened over the last decade?
I think there's just a sense, I always think when we were younger, it was our
Yeah.
parents saying, you have to get good grades. And it's kind of shifted to the parents going, please, yes, it's okay if you get a
Mhm.
B. You can learn to do that. And I think a lot of the peer culture with one another for some students has become so intense as colleges have been harder to get into, as they're exposed to a lot of different things. They're understanding a lot more around mental health and what that means and calling attention to it through social media and stuff. A lot of kids will come in and say, oh, I was reading this or I saw this video on TikTok and I think that's what I have. So I think just their awareness of it and bringing it into focus and it being talked about more is also a lot of where we're getting more of the presentation.
Hmm. And Angela, when you were in the classroom as a teacher, were you noticing some of this anxiety as well?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I think that, anxiety is so difficult to not just understand, but necessarily to see. It manifests in so many different ways, a lot of times in behavioral issues. And then, of course, as Laura mentioned, those kids that are holding it in, my son was one of them, holding it in all day in the classroom and then coming home and melting down. And so, for sure. And I mean, we are not a perfect school by any means. So we certainly have kids that are coming in that are still a little bit anxious. I think what has helped is that we've hopefully created an environment where they can communicate that.
Mm.
Um, and so even with our high schoolers, getting them to tell us, hey, this makes me feel very anxious. Could I do this as an alternative? Or, can I present to you independently rather than in the classroom setting? That for us, I think has been a really huge point of growth and a teaching tool that I don't think I necessarily noticed or saw in previous classrooms.
Mm.
And I think to that point, I mean, we had a parent at an open house say, what do you do? My child had an IEP. What do you do? And we
Mm.
kind of said the school is the accommodation. We do,
Yeah.
everything is very hands-on, multi-sensory. Kids can use talk to text. Kids can present in different ways. So we're really creating an environment where that's the norm and not the outlier. So some students take advantage of it. Some do more traditional presentation and work, but it's really just a norm at the school to have all of those things. So I think that's one way. And then I think the other two things that we really very early on started out to do was one, before a child starts, we have a parent meeting. So Angela and I meet with the parents just to learn about the child before they even step foot in the door. So we like to learn what makes them thrive, what are some of their weaknesses, what are the parents and the student wanting to get out of Harmony. And it really gives us just a glimpse into that student before they even get there. Sometimes the students will jump on to say hello, so they have a familiar face before they're walking in. We also have kind of before each semester a get to know each other so that it's familiar for the kids. And we also every day we start with about 10-15 minute morning meeting where we're teaching social emotional skills. So we're doing things like flexible thinking, working in groups, embracing your failures, and working those into the morning. So not only are they learning these skills, but they're also doing it across the ages. So we have all the students together so that they get to know students who may not be in their classes by the same age, and they're grouped together and they get to know one another and get that sense of belonging, and knowing kids in the hallway and at lunch and such. So
Mhm.
those have been
Yeah.
our very kind of intentional ways of creating this environment where the students can feel like they belong.
I was going to say we have one great anecdote too from this social emotional morning meeting is we had a student that started a couple weeks later into the semester, high school age student, and he decided to attend the morning meetings. But by the end of his first day, the end of the morning meeting of his first day, he had already met a number of high school students. So then he had a table to sit at for his next class with students that he already knew, and then he had a lunch table already.
Mm.
And my own daughter, being one of those students that ended up meeting him, said, Mom, I just think about those times in the past where I didn't have that. And then I was eating lunch alone. And so, I think it's just a great benefit to all of us to be able to feel inclusive in that way.
Yeah, I love that anecdote, Angela. And Laura, your statement of the school is the accommodation is so powerful. And I think is also representative of many of the innovative education models that I spotlight on this podcast
Yeah.
and elsewhere. It's that meeting the sort of personalized learning, meeting children where they're at, tailoring education to their needs and their talents. That is the accommodation for every child. And so I think it's great that you're able to put that out there as a main as the sort of the main persuasive factor of why families should consider harmony. I
Yeah.
think that's great.
Yeah, it's
So
exciting just the movement in general being, in education, moving towards that direction, because I think we're really addressing more of the individual needs, which is great for the
yeah.
kids.
Yeah, so great. So you started talking about morning meeting, and this is a great segue into tell us a little bit about the structure and approach of now the one day and what will become 3 days plus the additional Friday day, optional day. What are the academics like? What is the mix between academic and enrichment programs? What are you all offering?
We'll send that to our director of curriculum here, Angela.
Yeah.
So we have kind of an interesting model. The way that we've structured it this spring has been pretty different from how we are going to be structuring in the fall. So this spring, because it was Thursdays, we only offered a certain number of courses that the students could take either a la carte or they could take a full day or a couple of them. It just depended on what the student wanted. In the fall, because we're moving to 3 full days and that 1 half day, we're actually offering around 4 to 5 periods or each day, I guess 5 periods each day. But it is almost like a university model where
Mm.
students are able to sign up for individual courses, assuming they meet the age requirement, or sometimes in the case of math, for example, they have that prerequisite math course. So we offer all of the core, traditional core classes for all of the various levels. And then everything else is what we consider an elective or enrichment. Um, we've basically grouped up our students into 3 separate groups with the hopes of eventually moving to 4. So we have kind of a lower middle school age group and upper middle school, and right now high school with the hopes of eventually getting upper high school students. And that is how we tend to group the science classes, the social studies, the English language arts. We are using traditional homeschool curriculum as a backbone for those, but the teachers have the liberty to kind of run with that. We're pretty proud of the teachers that we've hired. Laura was saying yesterday that she was just looking at their, profiles, and she just is we both are in awe of all that these teachers have accomplished. Our math teacher, for example, he started out at MIT and then got his PhD at Harvard. He's a chemist, works on cancer fighting drugs, but he's a homeschooler. He loves to teach math. He's perhaps the most patient human being on the planet and is going to teach all of our math classes for us, which is just so amazing. And we feel very lucky for that. And even our ELA teacher, she has such a long history of working with kids that have different learning disabilities. This is kind of her bread and butter. And so she will take on our English language arts classes and then work hand in hand with some supplemental courses that we offer for students that have learning disabilities. So we have a literacy specialist that we've hired who will offer about 4 classes that are only 5 students each.
Hmm.
Those are for kids with learning disabilities or suspected learning disabilities, and they take those for the most part simultaneously with their English language arts class. And the idea is that those students may not be up to the same level, but they should be given grades based on their achievement, and they should be rewarded for their achievement and progress. And so she will work hand in hand with our ELA teacher to help grade papers to help work on things that need additional work. Um, so we feel very proud about that. And then from our elective standpoint, they really, I mean, we have a wide variety. So we are offering a theater program. We do have art as well.
Mm.
And then we have some more kind of academic-like courses, but they still are more fun. We have an escape rooms course, so it's really
Mm.
heavily critical thinking. We offer Odyssey of the Mind, which is kind of an older
Yeah.
program. What else am I missing, Laura? I feel like I'm missing some.
Spanish, graphic novels,
Yeah, we
psychology.
yeah, we teach so this semester we're running a current events class through graphic novels. And then next semester it will be friendship through graphic novels. So working on some of those middle school, especially friendship building skills and using the graphic novels as kind of a template for that.
And Angela, you mentioned that homeschool curriculum sort of forms the backbone of the curriculum resources, but again, that educators have a lot of freedom and flexibility with those. What are some of the homeschool curriculum resources that have appealed to you that you're using?
So we like a lot of Oak Meadow, honestly.
Mm,
Oak Meadow's
yes.
been a great curriculum for us. Our ELA courses all will run Fix It Grammar through IEW.
The
So every
Institute for
single level.
Excellence in Writing. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. So they will all use those. For our younger literature courses, we are using Brave Writer as a backbone,
Great.
as a way to kind of break down that literature. And for those that don't know Brave Writer, there's a lot of just great activities and kind of more engaging lesson plans that allow students to really break down the literature. For math, he actually creates most of his curriculum himself. So we kind of let him do
Right.
that. I'm trying to think what else.
Yes.
Yeah, right now that's been kind of our bread and butter.
So great. So Laura, you sort of talked a little bit about this earlier, but that there is this sort of growing popularity around innovative education models that are much more personalized, much more tailored to the individual needs of students. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. What are you seeing in North Carolina and elsewhere that leads you to think that the popularity is growing, that there's more and more interest? I guess not only just the rising demand in your own program, but what else are you seeing around you
Sure.
suggesting that this movement is really taking off?
Well, in addition to kind of what we're doing here, we're also part of a national organization for microschools called KaiPod.
Yeah,
So we work with them. So we're meeting on a weekly basis with different founders from all over. Some are doing something similar to us with the homeschool. Some are doing kind of an art program for high schoolers. Just such a variety of different niches of what students might need in a more traditional microschool sense. So I think a lot of what we have been learning as we've been doing this is seeing what the needs are where we are, but also seeing this happening across the country with our contact with KaiPod.
yeah, longtime listeners will know that I'm a huge fan of KaiPod.
Yeah,
So were you a part of the KaiPod Catalyst
we are
cohort? Yeah.
currently,
Okay.
yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so that's another wonderful resource for prospective founders who want to have that support and that kind of operational infrastructure
Yeah.
to launch these programs. So
Well, and as
definitely
we've
check
been
out
doing
KaiPod.
it, I often say to Angela, like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we're doing this as partners because
Yeah.
it's just to have one another to bounce ideas off of, to share the workload. So as we're working with a lot of individual founders, through KaiPod, I think there's a really nice having the support seems like something that is really valuable too, having the support of one another and KaiPod.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Angela, what are you seeing too in North Carolina and beyond around these innovative education models?
So I think, and this may seem, I don't know, a little bit, I don't know, pedestrian, but I think that one of the biggest indicators of the change in education is actually through Facebook. There are so many Facebook groups, either homeschool or moms groups, and I would say every single day there are posts about from moms or fathers that are saying, "Hey, I need to pull my kid out of public school. This isn't working for them for, a whole number of reasons." And to me, that's a pretty powerful statement. If it were, once a month or something, okay. But I mean, I'm part of I don't know how many Facebook groups, and I would say that in this area, every single day, or even across the country, every day we are seeing this.
Wow.
And we've gotten so many registrations just through Facebook, which I think
Mm.
is also an indicator of how times, are changing. I
Yeah.
think that parents, especially as a result of COVID, are recognizing that their kids really do, that everybody learns differently. Nobody learns the exact same way. And teaching becomes so much easier when you can really teach your child in the way that they learn. And so I think that's kind of the forethought behind all of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that what we're seeing now are these sort of network effects for both families and founders. So founders, prospective founders can get support and inspiration from people like you who have gone before them, and then they say, "Oh, they're just like me. If they can do it, I can do it." So those network effects, and then as you're saying, Angela, these Facebook groups provide a lot of those family network effects where friends and neighbors and acquaintances see that others are doing something like this or choosing something different for their kids, and then they feel confident to explore those options as well. So I think that this is really just beginning. I know we'll have an opportunity to meet in person this weekend at a Jumpstarting Microschools conference in Greensboro, North Carolina, that's being hosted by the John Locke Foundation. There's, as you mentioned, lots of other types of catalyst programs and microschool incubator programs to help founders get off the ground. So, such an exciting time in education for both families and founders.
Yeah, I would agree. And to add, the other kind of benefit that we have really had from joining the KaiPod community is that they are so well versed on how legislation is changing.
Mm,
And it does have an impact on small school, small business owners. So whether, there's changes in federal funding for the public school system, it still has an impact on us. And so I have found that, learning from them in that regard and being able to stay abreast of the news where it may not be in kind of our normal daily news has been really critical.
well, and related to that, North Carolina now has a universal school choice program enabling education funding to follow students. I know other microschool founders who I've had on the podcast from North Carolina are finding this to be a real game changer for them in terms of making their programs more accessible to more families. Is that a program that you're tapping into, or what is that looking like for you?
Yeah, so it's something that we are working on as well as our ESA funds. So it's a kind of a little process to become a vendor that can accept those funds. So we're
Yeah.
still in the midst of working with the state for those. But the idea is really to make this as accessible to as many people as possible. So
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
So, as we begin to wrap up, I'd love to hear your advice and inspiration for future founders, maybe people who were where you were last spring when you had this idea and then decided to go for it. What would you say to entrepreneurial parents and teachers looking to create a new school or learning environment in the near future?
I think
Mm.
from my perspective, it was really we were really being authentic and honest about what we needed, what we wanted for our students. And we were open to kind of morphing that based on what we learned. So we did take some things that we learned during this soft launch and moved it, adjusted it for the fall. But I think early on that we had a lot of excitement. We had a lot of persistence. We were like, we're going to do this. I know we talked to somebody once and they said, well, what if it doesn't work? And we looked at each other and went, I hadn't even thought of that. And kind of
Ah,
laughed with
so
each other and
great.
went, oh my gosh, that thought hadn't even crossed my mind. Like we had just made our minds up that we were going to do it and we were going to make it work, whatever that looked like. And I think just people say, oh, what made you do it? And really it started with our own kids, kind of what do
Mm.
they need? What do we want? What environment do we want them to be in on a daily basis? And that helped to kind of lead the vision very quickly.
Ah, it's great. Angela?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a fear component to all of it. I think for me, it was equivalent to the same fear of pulling my kids out of school and deciding to homeschool in the first place.
Mm.
So I think working through that fear is pretty critical. I'll say, and Laura knows this, that I also would go to my own therapy sessions talking through the mechanics of this and how I was feeling about all of it, just to, feel a little bit more confident in what I was doing, knowing that, intellectually I felt very confident, but just working through those emotions as well.
Mm.
And then the other thing I would say is, and Laura touched on this, is being able to take critical feedback. It's so important. What we have learned even in these first few months is that if the parents are not happy, if the students are not happy, if the teachers are not happy, it's not going to work. And so understanding that there may be feedback that we don't necessarily want to hear, but we need to hear is so important. So
Right.
important. Yeah.
So, if listeners and viewers want to learn more about Harmony Homeschool Academy, follow your growth and your journey, how can they do that?
We have a website, which is harmonyhomeschoolacademy.com, and Facebook, also harmonyhomeschoolacademy.com. And if they're interested, we have a monthly newsletter that goes out. We do have events that we invite families to, even if they aren't part of the community yet, but might be interested. And those are always listed along with kind of the going-ons. So we would love to have you join that list as well.
Love to see everyone.
Well, Laura and Angela, I'm looking forward to seeing you in person
Yes.
sooner than later, and just so thrilled by the popularity of your program. Really looking forward to seeing where it goes. And thank you so much for being on the LiberatED podcast.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so much
so
for
much.
having us, and thank you for having this avenue for founders. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.